Good evening. I'm Jim Zirin, and you are watching The Digital Age. Tonight's show is about corruption in the New York City Police Department, a disease which strangely afflicts the department about every 20 years. Tonight's guest is an expert on police corruption. With us is Michael Armstrong. Mike Armstrong was a federal prosecutor. He was the district attorney of New York County. He was chief counsel to the legendary Knapp Commission investigating police corruption in the 1970s. And he is the author of a marvelous book, They Wished They Were Honest. They Wished They Were Honest, an account of his exploits as chief counsel for the Knapp Commission some 40 years ago. Mike, we're delighted to have you with us.
Nice to be here, Jim.
Now, first, the title. I congratulate you on your book, but first the title, They Wish They Were Honest. What does that refer to?
It comes from a quote or a statement made to me at the time by Frank Serpico. And Frank Serpico was the whistleblower cop who started it all by making allegations that weren't followed up and that ultimately wound up in an article in the New York Times that was then caused Mayor Lindsay to create the Knapp Commission. And also Frank is chiefly known because they made a really marvelous movie on his exploits called, oddly enough, Serpico.
Won an Academy Award for Al Pacino.
That's right.
We all saw it.
That's right. And but Frank said at the time, and I've been quoting it ever since, really, because it seemed to me a very wise observation. He said, 10% of the department is absolutely corrupt, and 10% of the department is absolutely honest. And the other 80%, they wish they were honest. Now, that really captured what was going on in the department at the time, because there was a kind of a fog that permeated the department of a acceptance of corruption.
A culture of corruption.
It really was at a low level, but the attitude was that corruption was tolerated, and we found people who bragged, lied about doing corrupt things they didn't even do just to be one of the boys, and in those days Frank Serpico's mentor, Sid Cooper, was the head of the internal affairs at the time, and this rough character, bald, it looked like Kojak. He was a really tough guy. He characterized the corrupt cops in two ways, as meat eaters and grass eaters. And the meat eaters
and grass eaters, what's the difference?
Well, meat eaters were the crooks. Those are the guys who covered up serious crime and who were involved really in heavy corruption. And the grass eaters were the people who just participated in the low-level, everyday corruption that permeated the department. And I think, and the grass eaters is what Frank Serpico was talking about when he said they wish they were honest, because they really did. Cops come on the job with a feeling of idealism and wanting to do what's right, and then in those days just got kind of engulfed by a cynical attitude about corruption. And I think that our contribution, together with other things that were happening at the time, resulted in actually a change in the department from with the grass eaters. The grass eaters gave it up and took the opportunity to do what they wanted to do anyway, and that is to be honest and take pride in the job as opposed to taking a few bucks now and then.
Well, Serpico testified about a pad in the Bronx. Now, the pad was really money for the grass eaters, wasn't it?
Not really. A pad was a generic term. A pad was a term that covered a lot of different things, but it meant an organized collection of money, mostly in gambling. Frank was...
But also restaurant owners, tow truck operators.
Yeah, going on the pad was a term that applied to really any regular pickup that was then divided up. If you, in the plainclothes situation, what they had, they used to collect around in their division, and the division collect from all the gambling operations and put it all in a big pot and divide it up on a share basis. Each plainclothesman had a share, and the supervisor had a share and a half. And you didn't get your shares for the first couple of months because they had to check you out, but that's okay because when you left, you got 2 months of severance pay.
And the money wasn't paid necessarily to cover up illegal operations. It might have just been paid for protection from the police, so that...
Well, protection from themselves. Instead of arresting them, they collected money from them.
Yes, that's right. So now, what was... I mean, police officers in those days were paid about $40,000 a year, or thereabouts?
I do not recall, but
how much?
It
What
might
was
have been less than
even
that.
less? And what was the
Much
size
less
of the
than that.
pad? As much as they were paid, how much would a police officer get from the pad?
Well, when you say a police officer,
Say a plainclothesman.
a plainclothesman depending upon the division, would range from a few $100s to maybe $1,500 a month, depending, and that's why the shares were important. When you move from one division to another, the share was of different value. In the high gambling areas of the city, of course, there was more money being collected and more money being paid. So, as I recall, that about $1,500 per month was what in the really high-paying areas is what you got.
Now, the heyday of the Knapp Commission, which you served as chief counsel, was in the early 1970s. Now, here we are 40 years later. Why are you writing a book about it?
Well, I don't know. I had put together a kind of a composite of war stories of things that I had done right around that time, and didn't, for one reason or other, didn't do anything about it. And then in the last few years, it occurred to me that the Knapp Commission was relevant and told its own story, and would probably make a good book. So I got those notes and those things that I had written before and put them all together, and I figured that 40 years is enough time so that I'm not stepping on the toes of the important thing that we wrote, which was the Knapp Commission report. People asked me in those days, said, why don't you write a book? And I said, we did. It's called the Knapp Commission report. Go read it. And but now, 40 years, nobody remembers what the Knapp Commission was, and it's, you know, it's got
Except you and me.
You and me, right? Well, we're older folk, you know. But it's got its little niche in history, whatever it is, and I think it's okay for me now to come out and tell the inside story, the fun stuff, the stuff about the happy hooker and about Bill Phillips.
We'll get to the happy
stuff.
Hooker, of course, but the end and aim of the Knapp Commission was not to make cases against specific individuals. It was, if that happened, it was incidental. It was really to do what?
Our task was to identify the patterns of corruption in the department as they existed in 1971 when we did it. And that's what we were told we were supposed to do, and that's what we undertook to do. And to hold hearings for the purpose of publicizing that. The problem is a lot of people knew what was going on. They used to say, heck, you could go to any kid on any street corner in Harlem and he'll tell you all about what's going on. Or all the bars on the east side, it was perfectly clear that somebody's getting paid off because they couldn't do the things they did with double parking and all the rest of it unless they were. So everybody kind of smirked and knew that there was corruption, but to take it and say, okay, here it is. Sid Cooper, the fellow I talked about before, had a saying after we were all over. He said, what the Knapp Commission did was make us come out and talk about corruption openly. He said, we used to, meaning we, the police brass, used to sit around talking about police corruption with all the enthusiasm of a bunch of old ladies talking about venereal disease, which in a different...
That's not much enthusiasm.
No, particularly a different time, you know. But what we did was identify the patterns, and we did it by putting people in a public hearing who would testify backed up by surveillance tapes to what the facts were. So it wasn't just, they weren't just saying it, we had the proof that it actually was
So
going
you
on.
held public hearings, you had the subpoena power, you put them under oath. Now, Knapp Commission was named for its chairman, Whitman Knapp,
Yeah, he's
who
passed
became
away.
a federal judge. What was he like? Tell about him.
Whit was at the time 61 years old. He was very, very smart and very wise. He had a lot of insight into a lot of things, and he guided the commission, I think, as far as its directions. He was, but he also was very unselfish in giving credit to other people, and he didn't aggrandize to himself. He was really very, very special.
And you had
I think
other-
he became a special judge.
Yeah, you had other distinguished commissioners as well, didn't you? You had Cy Vance, who became Secretary of State, the father of the incumbent district attorney of New York County.
That's
and, John Sprizzo became a federal judge, and who else?
Joe Montserrat was then the president of the Board of Education, and he was on it. And Arnold Baumann was, who later
Also became a federal
judge. He was on the commission before Sprizzo, and then Frank Thomas, who ultimately became president of the Ford Foundation.
A very distinguished group. Now, you held these public hearings over what period of time in the early 1970s?
We had one set of hearings that went for 2 weeks in October of '71. And that was the set of hearings that we intended to give. And what that did is it laid out the findings that we had, our undercover agents, our tapes, our films that we took, about the corruption that we found in the department at the time, chiefly centering around the testimony of a police officer named Bill Phillips, who at first we had caught him, and then he had worked for us for about 3 months. So we set out in those hearings what the patterns were as we had found them. And then we had not intended really to go into the story of Frank Serpico and what had happened to him, because that was already out. It was, and
That was in the New York Times.
it was in the New York Times and elsewhere, and we didn't feel it was really necessary. But then a local politician came out and accused us at the end of our first set of hearings of covering up for John Lindsay, and Whit Knapp said, well, look, the reason we didn't hold the hearings on Serpico is not to distract from what we have found in these hearings. And if we raise a big political hoorah about covering up for John Lindsay, who then had presidential aspirations, we will distract even more, so let's have a set of hearings. So we had a second set of hearings in December that where all of the participants in the Serpico story were given an opportunity to come forward and give their side of what was happening, and then we wrote what our conclusions were in our report.
Now,
about that part
one aspect of what you encountered in your investigation was the so-called blue wall of silence. What was that?
It was a legendary myth. I mean, I was advised, for instance, by a lot of friends, don't take the job because you'll never do anything because cops don't talk. And that's what, the idea was, that police officers will not talk, and you will not be successful in telling what's going on in the police department with respect to corruption unless you get some corrupt cops to talk, and they don't talk. Well, we ran into 5 of them really, and 4 of them talked. Bill Phillips, who was absolute, he'd been 13 years on the job, and he was
He was your
thoroughly
star
corrupt.
witness.
He turned out to be. When we caught him, we brought him down to our offices in the forlorn hope of using the old Mutt and Jeff routine, whereby one of us would be nice and the other would be nasty, and maybe he would talk to us. And Paul Rooney, who was one of the lawyers working with me on the commission. He took Phillips into the room, and he was going to shout and scream at him and get nasty, and then I was supposed to come in with the cigarette. And he was only in there for about 45 seconds, and the phone rings. He says, he's ready to go. And I came in and I started to give him the speech that you give, saying, look, you can't be a little halfway over the fence, you know, there's no such thing as being a little bit pregnant. You got to. And he just looked at me and he said, Mr. Armstrong, I've been sitting where you're sitting. I've had people sitting where I'm sitting. I know what I got to do. And he went out the next day and made cases against 4 organized crime people, and then proceeded to work for us for 3 months. Well, it turns out that once you catch a cop in a compromising situation, the only reason that apparently that people that they hadn't talked before is that people hadn't asked him.
Now, Phillips was collecting money from, and I promised you we'd get to Xaviera Hollander, a madam in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, very attractive, and she was paying him money for protection to keep the police off her back. And then there was a go-between between Hollander and Phillips named Teddy Ratnoff. Now tell about Teddy Ratnoff.
Teddy Ratnoff was this
fascinating underworld character.
Oh, he's a bald-headed little weasel is what he was. And for all I know, still is. He manufactured our electronic equipment. Paul, when he had been in the U.S. Attorney's Office, Paul Rooney had come in contact with him as a manufacturer of equipment, and so we got him to manufacture our equipment. And we had used it in an unsuccessful attempt to try and get some information about prostitutes and corruption. And he said, you want a prostitute? I know a prostitute. And he was working at the time bugging the suite of a prostitute by the name of Zirin-Why Hollander, who later wrote a book called The Happy Hooker, which was the reason that Teddy was bugging the rooms there, was to collect material for that book. And and he said he could insinuate himself as the go-between between Xaviera and the police officer whom she wanted to pay off because there were 3 cases that she needed help with, and there was this one cop who could do it. And so we wired Teddy up, and we had our agents follow him, and he funneled something like $8,000 in a number of incidents to this guy Bill Phillips, who purported to be able to fix a case in court and another case, and then maybe even get to a Supreme Court judge, a state Supreme Court judge. It was, and that led to, ultimately to one day Phillips patting Ratnoff down, looking for
seeing if he was wired up.
Seeing if he was wired. They were working with a lawyer by the name of Irwin Germais in this corrupt situation, and Germais said to Phillips, pat him down, after they'd been doing this for months. And Phillips patted him down, and he found the equipment. He said, what's this? What's this? And Teddy said, it's a beeper. It's a beeper. It's a telephone answering service. So Phillips just rips his shirt off, and meanwhile our agents are running up to try and be what assistance they can be. And Phillips is making threatening statements to. He later told me when he said he knew when he saw it was a transmitting device, he knew there was people out there listening. I said to him, Bill, what would you have done if it had just been a self-recorded device? He said, I'd have thrown it out the window. He didn't tell me whether he would have removed it from Teddy Ratnoff's body before he threw it out the window or not. But anyway, our agents came into the room and said, we're from the Knapp Commission, and took Teddy away, and later on we picked up Bill and we were on our way.
Serpico testified before the Knapp Commission in December as follows. He said, through my appearance here today, I hope that police officers in the future will not experience the same frustration and anxiety that I was subjected to for the past 5 years at the hands of my superiors because of my attempt to report corruption. I was made to feel that I had burdened them with an unwanted task. The problem is that the atmosphere does not exist in which an honest police officer can act without fear of ridicule or reprisal from fellow officers. Police corruption cannot exist unless it is at least tolerated at higher levels in the department. Therefore, the most important result that can come from these hearings is a conviction by police officers that the department will change. In order to ensure this, an independent permanent investigative body dealing with police corruption like this commission is essential. Now, you published that statement in your book. It was part of his testimony. Do you agree with it?
Sure, absolutely. The main factor in a clean police department is a hierarchy that is dedicated to keep it clean, and I believe that we have that in New York now. I mean, I think that Commissioner Kelly is absolutely dedicated to the notion that you cannot tolerate you can't tolerate corruption, and he has a very smoothly functioning Internal Affairs Bureau headed by Charles Campisi, who that the Internal Affairs Bureau will go out and catch the guys, the meat eaters. And
those are the real crooks.
The real crooks, and the meat eaters. The only way you're going to deal with them is by catching them and throwing them in jail. You can't have systemic changes. I think that the systemic changes have resulted over the years in a department that is very hostile to corruption rather than welcoming it.
Well, one of your recommendations is there must be command accountability, and with CompStat, where there's computerized statistics of crime in various precincts, there is a command. The whole exercise is command responsibility, and that's happened before Kelly. It's happened under Kelly, and it's vigorously administered. Is that really the secret of destroying the culture of corruption?
Well, I think it's part. I think it's a general attitude of, as I say, of hostility to corruption, which if nowadays you can still be corrupt, but you have to lie about it. You can't brag about it, and it's certainly well known now. As you know, we have a commission to combat police corruption, which is
full disclosure. You're the chairman, and I'm on it.
That's right. That you and I work on together, and it's not like the Knapp Commission or the Mullen Commission, which was 20 years ago.
So 20 years after Knapp was Mullen, and that's 20 years ago.
Right. And there has been a police scandal every 20 years since the late 19th century. So that the idea was that every 20 years you have a scandal. I think when it came our turn, what we dealt with was the grass eaters, the attitude of corruption, to try and get rid of that, and I think we succeeded in that. By the time the Mullen Commission came along, the meat eaters had gotten worse because the narcotics trade had taken much greater hold of the society in general, and for other reasons, and the machinery, for one reason or another, the machinery in the department for dealing with the meat eaters had just broken down, and as a result of the Mullen Commission, they instigated a reform of that machinery, so that today I think what we really have is you certainly don't have the organized, accepted corruption that you had among the grass eaters. And the meat eaters, they can be corrupt, but better watch out because they got a really tough bunch of guys who are after them. So I hope that we won't need another big scandal, but if so, you and I are there to try and see that people find out about it.
Well, let's hope so. Mike, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. This has been just marvelous. So I have a question for you, and the question is, has the culture of police corruption been shattered since the Knapp Commission, or has it just been driven underground?
It certainly hasn't been driven underground according to all the evidence that we can find. There is no longer fog of corruption in the department. There's no longer the stultifying attitude of acceptance of corruption that caused idealistic police officers to turn and take money. So that I believe, and I don't think I'm believing what I want to believe, that it has changed, and it's changed because of us, because of the Mullen Commission, because of the efforts of police commissioners, because of the efforts of mayors, and I think right now you've got a very good police department with a superlative leadership, and if it keeps up, then maybe we won't take our 20-year turn. Who knows?
Let's hope not. Mike Armstrong, thank you so much for coming
Jim.
by, and thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more on the digital age. Please visit our website at www.digitalage.org. For the Digital Age, I'm Jim Zirin. Good night and all the best.